I went into this weekend thinking, what the hell am I going to say about boutique cinemas? I won't claim to be an expert, but actually, as of yesterday, I'm now an expert on boutique cinemas, and I'm going to share with you some of my findings and speculations. But in order to do that, I'm also going to give you a brief history lesson on luxury cinema in Birmingham, which is not a contradiction in terms, believe it or not. So just as a bit of background, Flatpack Film Festival started in 2006. We happen in March. I've got some flyers I'll scatter later. Every March, venues all over Birmingham, very responsive to different places and mixing film with other art forms, trying to create a sense of occasion. I've never worked in a cinema. I just tend to run into cinemas and throw curveballs at them. So this is slightly unfamiliar territory for me. But I think something is potentially something quite interesting is happening with this whole boutique boom. Whether we're going to see quite as many boutique cinemas opening up in the next 3-4 years as the main players are saying, we shall see. But one of them that's definitely opening is the Everyman in Birmingham next spring at some point as part of the Mailbox development. That'll be the first cinema Birmingham has had since 2002. And judging, based on the reports in the paper last week that thousands of 30-somethings are fleeing London and moving to Birmingham and the like because they've been priced out, maybe that's our potential audience for the Everyman. But I'm just going to have a look at a few other potential portents for boutique cinema operators who might be looking at Birmingham. So this is boutique cinema 1900 style. This is the Curzon Hall, almost literally a stone's throw from where the Everyman will be opening. Before we had fixed cinemas, we had a promoter called Waller Jeffs who put on regular film shows. This wasn't he would kind of run seasons every year from 1900, I think. This is 1906, and apparently 2,000 to 3,000 people at varying levels of discomfort would cram in to see flickery black and white images on a relatively small screen. Waller Jeffs himself was hell-bent on getting a middle-class audience, so the cinema was disreputable and corrupting to morals and not something that decent people should be seen at. And his whole thing really was turning that around, was trying to bring in a more respectable audience. So he would get endorsements from civic dignitaries like the kind of people you see behind him here, councillors and clergymen and the like. He would have competitions for young scholars. He would run promotions. This is an advert for his Curzon Hall show, which, as you see, includes free tram ticket with your cinema ticket. This is particularly important for luring people from the more affluent areas like Harborne and Edgbaston into the city centre. It mixed success, to be honest. You see right from the beginning that from second year of operation, his prices went down slightly. He realised that he'd overpriced himself, and I think that does happen even today with some boutique cinemas. They will go out all guns blazing with £13 tickets in somewhere like Knutsford and then realise that they've got to scale back slightly. And in lots of ways, Waller Jeffs was ahead of his time. He was killed off by what we now know of as cinemas, which came in 1910 onwards and pretty much forced him out of town. He ended up working for other people as a cinema manager. Someone who did get it right and who picked exactly the right moment really was Oscar Deutsch, and this is when cinema really started taking off with the middle classes. Enormous boom in the 30s. Odeon alone went from nothing in 1930 to 258 cinemas by 1941, and a lot of the lure of the Odeon was gorgeous buildings, opulent interiors, well-dressed commissars and usherettes, creating an experience that was a complete contrast with your everyday life. It was all about the experience, and that's why I think it's relevant really to the whole boutique phenomenon. The film in some ways is incidental, but the level of service, the food, the kind of the environment that you're in, it's all crucial. And it was described nicely, excuse all the verbiage, but this is a quote from Fyodor Komisarevsky, Russian theatre director and designer who also designed a lot of interiors for cinemas in the UK. I think Walthamstow EMD was one of his last surviving ones. And what I like particularly is while they're there, they can, with reason, consider themselves as good as anyone and are able to enjoy their cigarettes or their little love affair. So it's really bringing home the thought that, I mean, that these were high class in contrast with the cinemas that had gone before them, but they were still very much democratic in lots of ways. You'd have different levels of pricing. Classes would mingle. There were obviously hierarchies in cinemas, but it was bringing opulence to the masses, if you like. So, and while I'm here, I should quickly refer to the coffee rooms here at Tyneside, since we're here, this is a slightly fuzzy picture of Tyneside making a very similar kind of appeal, newsreel cinema at that time, obviously, but just they kind of accidentally hit on the notion of having a cafe as part of their cinema because they had some unused space, and it became a crucial part of the building's offer, which is still there now. So back to Birmingham, just briefly to finish off my history of Birmingham. This is the electric. Between the Odeon 30s boom and the electric, there's not I know Tony Jones is here, so he could probably correct me. There's not a great deal to write home about in terms of luxury cinema in the 50s, 60s. You have places like the Cinephone, which started out with high ideals of kind of European art house cinema and quickly ended up making its money from soft porn mainly. The Electric itself is a really fascinating example of how opportunistic cinemas are. It's been a newsreel cinema. It's shown cartoons to kids. It's shown sort of second run mainstream stuff. It's shown soft porn, like most cinemas in Birmingham in the 70s seem to have done. It was an art house flea pit in the 90s, which is my equivalent really of the Hyde Park Picture House, the sort of cinematic education, £2 Pasolini double bills and such like. And there's a story of the building called The Last Projectionist. The current proprietors have made a documentary kind of detailing this history. It's a bit of a promo for their cinema, really, which is fair enough. But there's an exquisitely awkward bit where one of the 90s incarnation, one of the previous members of the team comes to have a look around at the newly refurbished Electric Cinema and marvel at the luxury flats that used to be kind of covered in pigeon crap and leaking and mouldy, and that's kind of a portent really of what's happening with cinema generally. It's becoming slightly harder to see the place for the art house flea pit, and in some ways the Electric as it is now was ahead of the curve. It's now been going 10 years. It's got sofa seating. You can text your waiter. They have nice nibbles. And it's been doing really well. It is, I'd imagine it's getting nervous about the arrival of the Everyman because they're going to do all of that on a slightly larger scale, but I'd hope they can keep going. So on a broader level, I want to now look at what's happening with boutique cinema in terms of the expansion across the UK, with a bit of reference to that Odeon boom. So when you start looking around, you realise how many places like Harrogate, Hitchin, Bourne, all of these places, you'd think, can they sustain a boutique cinema? They're all thinking about it. It's a craze, and it's partly driven, obviously, by Picture House, Curzon, and Everyman, all with big expansion plans. So it's worth thinking about what effect that might have on the cinema landscape. Those three players, I think I'm right in saying they've only got 5% of market share at the moment, but that could increase somewhere, obviously, for young, beautiful people to hang out all of the quotes that I found in local papers about potential boutique cinema, you pretty much every article there will be a councillor talking about how this is going to raise the tone of the area. It's become the new kind of upmarket wine bar, I suppose. It's an important part of any new development, and I think it's interesting how cinema can do that. I think it captures people's imagination from a sort of placemaking point of view. One more quote. So this is from this is the one that's planned for Hammersmith. So where are we? In terms of the 30s boom, I think the interesting parallel really is this whole placemaking thing, because this is something you see in a lot of the new cinemas in the late 20s and 30s. People, the importance of the local authority and the developer in a partnership with the cinema. It's as much about the experience as it is about the film, and it's as much about the local area and having a kind of gentrification effect, I guess, if you like, which is what you see here. So the premise of my provocation was supposedly how is that democratic? It was kind of opposing crowd-funded grassroots cinema, and some of the examples that Mike and Phil have talked about, against the boutique cinema. But I think both are actually responses to the same thing. I think we've seen an awful lot of stagnation and neglect in the cinema sector in terms of the bulk of cinemas. There's been a neglect of the experience, and obviously with new technology and all of these distractions that people have been talking about, the experience becomes more and more important. And whether you're a small community volunteer-run cinema or a boutique cinema, your aim would be to offer something where people feel part of that space, and you're giving people an experience. So that does raise some questions, which I'll go on to, but I just wanted to quickly talk about this. This is the Showcase Super Lux in Boston, which is maybe the kind of ne plus ultra of deluxe cinemas, potentially. Obviously, it's a multiplex-run thing, but $28 for a ticket, iPad menus, you have to be 21 and over. There's a bit of bump on their site about this. Again, the same kind of quotes about higher end and demographics. And this I thought was instructive. One of the customers talking about the experience. And then the concluding quote from this article in the Boston Globe: "The only downside now is I have to figure out how to stay awake through the movie." And it does make you think, so that what we're running away from is texting teenagers, rustling popcorn, and we're going to have a pristine experience. But are we going to exchange the noise of texting teenagers for snoring, overfed, affluent people who've had too much food before their movie? So, some questions to finish off with. Can cinemas help to regenerate neighbourhoods? I just think it's really interesting how cinema obviously has that currency at the moment. There's a real receptiveness to it that could be exploited by other people looking. I think you could probably learn some tricks if you are looking to open a cinema from the way that people like Curzon are working in harness with local authorities and developers. The stats on how effective it is, I don't know how much research there's been done on that, but it would be interesting to look at. Will a boutique boom mean a wider choice of films? And this is one of the big questions that I'm not entirely convinced by. I think a lot of these sites outside of London will end up showing fairly similar fare to the mainstream multiplexes in lots of ways. I think they all have a commitment to diversifying, but that will obviously be subjected to market forces, and as I've said a couple of times, people are really there for the experience. It's not so much about the film. So the follow-on question is, where will this leave the standard cinema experience? If you purely want to pay 7 or 8 quid and see something, I mean, I don't want to overplay the boutique boom. It's not going to take over and swamp everything. But it will, in terms of what we've been saying about younger audiences in particular, this boutique model is a bit of a refuge from those annoying young people. Where's their entry point for interesting kinds of cinema? I think that's something worth keeping in mind. And I think I've run out of points, so I'm going to stop there. Cheers.